My name's Danny and I'm here to talk to you about ayahuasca. It's a long time for me to listen to my voice, so if you want to put your hand up and ask me anything halfway through, or ask me to clarify stuff or to expand upon stuff, please feel free. Okay, good stuff. Right, what is ayahuasca? Ayahuasca is very, very strong to begin with. Something which provokes terror and wonder and nausea and sometimes dramatic changes in consciousness, and not just in individuals who drink it, but in whatever system it finds itself. So, for example, in the media hasn't really known what to do with it, really. The media is all about sound bites, and ayahuasca doesn't really fit into a sound bite. It won't really fit into an hour's talk, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. The legal system as well hasn't really worked out how to deal with ayahuasca, and we're going to be talking about that later, but it's thrown a bit of a curveball at the British legal system, and in fact legal systems all over the world. It's going to be seen in the courts next Monday after a 2-year investigation in England. It's not your normal drugs case that's going on at the moment. So what is ayahuasca? We're going to start by looking at what it is as perceived in the media. In 1996, that was the first article in the British media about ayahuasca, and it was in the Independent, and it was quite a respectful article. The gentleman who went to drink it went along and he drank his dose, and the question appeared to him, "Why are you here?" That was what the brew asked him. That was in fact the first thing that ayahuasca asked the British press. "Why are you here?" And he said, "I'm here to write a story." And ayahuasca was not satisfied by that answer. He didn't come up with a better answer. He meditated upon all manner of things, and he ended up experiencing life as a tree for a short time, and he gave a very even-handed, even-branched review of what ayahuasca is, concluding with some kind remarks. And that was generally the mould when you look at ayahuasca articles. You have someone who goes along to a ceremony, there's a degree of terror, weirdness, what are these strange people doing? And normally by the end of the article, and in fact by the end of an ayahuasca session, if you ever have the fortune to take part in one, the things tend to get resolved in a positive fashion. So here is an article from 2008, Santa Daime, The Drug-Fueled Religion. And what you find in the media often is you get a fairly outrageous headline, because the headline isn't written by the person who's written the article, by the person who's actually experienced ayahuasca or Daime. I'm talking today mainly about Daime. So here's what the guy from the Sunday Times said. "I'm deep in the Amazon forest, anxiously losing my mind as the world begins to disintegrate. Around me, all sense of distance is wrapping itself up like spatial origami, slowly shrinking until the entire dimension has disappeared. A moment ago, I was surrounded by 200 people dressed in white and singing like angels, but now they occupy the same space as me, if that makes any sense." In his visions during ayahuasca, he saw a red door and he knew something very important was behind it, but he didn't open that door, and he concludes at the end of the article that that door is staying shut. So it's not your normal article, it's not your normal subject. It poses all kinds of difficulties for journalists and also for us to understand. He finished off his article talking about the kind, gentle and thoughtful members of this religion. This is Alex Bellos. He's an expert in Brazilian football, apparently. He wrote his first article in 2001 in The Guardian. I gave a talk here before at Breaking Convention, which is all about the history of the media and the legal situation around ayahuasca, and I'm not going to repeat that talk. You can check it online, but I'm just going to tell you about Alex Bellos' experience, because it's quite funny and it's quite illuminating. So he was in Rio Branco, on the border of Bolivia and Peru and Brazil, on the Brazilian side, and that's where Santa Daime comes from. I'm going to explain it later, but Santa Daime is a specific lineage of ayahuasca use. It's one of the ayahuasca religions that grew up in the 1910s, 1920s. Anyway, so this guy, he went off and he was doing a travel report on Rio Branco, and his first night he went to the brothel, and he had a bad time at the brothel, and then the second night he went to a barquinha session. Barquinha is a different line. This is what he said: "My Daime was not working, so I went outside and swigged another cup. Very shortly after that, he lost control of his jaw, he lost control of his legs, and then he said, I felt sick and vomited. My jaw started moving uncontrollably. I tried to focus on a woman, since I remembered that sexual impulses can lessen the effect. Unable to summon desire, I asked myself why, and it occurred to me that I could not remember if I was straight or gay. The more I thought about myself, the less I could be sure of. Was I a man or a woman? British or Brazilian? Was I thinking in Portuguese or English? So this poor man was deeply confused by the experience that he had. And in our particular line, we have a 3-day taboo, which is sexual abstinence, 3 days before and 3 days afterwards. And it's something we try to approach with a degree of respect. And unfortunately, I don't think Alex got that bit right. Although, by the end of the article, again, he was all right. He tried to leave. I think they didn't really want him to leave. You don't really want people wandering around on the streets in that kind of condition. I've seen someone at a Barquinha ceremony, a friend of mine actually, a gringo like myself, who was in a bit of state at Barquinha. And some of the older ladies were crossing themselves as they saw him in his state. So I can imagine that the people there were quite confused by this chap. There's a whole lot of cultural confluences coming together when we go to the jungle. It's confusing for us, but it's confusing to them as well. Anyway, Alex was not deterred. He went back again in November 2005 in this article in the Telegraph, Now Let Us Hallucinate, and he had another session of terror, and I can't quite remember how he concluded this one, but it was kind of along the lines of, I won't be doing it again. But then he went back again in 2011, this one, in a journal called Intelligent Life, which is probably a misnomer. In this one, again, he was really confused. He was generally quite respectful of our brew and our tradition, but he wrote this in the middle of it. The concoction of daimi is highly ritualized. The vine is seen as masculine, and men are involved in its preparation. The leaf is feminine, and women are responsible for cleaning it, which they often do with their legs open. Which is just an extraordinary thing to say. I mean, that's, a woman might sit on the ground cleaning the leaves. This picture here is a feitio. That means making. Daimi is made by the men. The men beat the ayahuasca vine all in a synchronized rhythm. Dum, dum, dum. And with singing as well, or with prayer, or in silence. The whole thing is very ritualized. This is an article from The Sun. Mind-busting jungle drug hits UK. Thank you very much for that. That's not ayahuasca, that's DMT, although the article was about ayahuasca. The English justice system has had a little bit of trouble telling DMT and ayahuasca apart. In fact, when the busts happened in England, the first thing that happened was they tried to do my friend for importation of, I think, 40 kilograms of DMT. Basically, the point I'm trying to make is whenever we look at ayahuasca, we're already looking at it from a great distance through a whole series of filters. So, to answer the question, what is ayahuasca, we've got to kind of pick apart what our projections onto ayahuasca are, so we can really try and view it as it is. And in a word, ayahuasca is ineffable. It's massive, deeply incredible, and best to stay silent about it. And in fact, the visions that one sees with ayahuasca in our tradition, you're encouraged not to talk about them. People will say, if you speak about them, they'll go away. This is a little bit different to the Western perspective, and this is another one of these filters you have to kind of work through to understand what ayahuasca is. You often hear this story of, it was like 20 years of psychotherapy in an evening, and well, maybe it was, but actually that's one very specific way of looking at it, and that might involve things like a sharing circle at the end. I would counsel against the sharing circle at the end, because an enormity of imagery that will come to you, and then trying to put that into words, even while you haven't really integrated it properly, is bound to limit it. It's trying to catch a whale in a net. In fact, we have a hymn which goes, Ouve muito e fala pouco para conhecer seus caboclos, which means listen a lot and speak a little in order to get to know the forest spirits. So, what is ayahuasca and where does it come from? This is the Kashinawa Indians. I've done a ceremony with the Kashinawa Indians. Absolutely fantastic. They have a real command of ayahuasca, certainly the ones that I met. And they've been using it for a very long time. We don't know exactly how long. There's not very much archaeological evidence of ayahuasca. There's a bone pipe from about 2000 BC which has some DMT residue. So we know that people in the jungle were using plants containing DMT a long time ago. We don't really know when ayahuasca use began. It's spread all over the Amazon, really, ayahuasca, but it's not as if every tribe uses ayahuasca. In fact, there are tribes that won't touch it because it's got associations with sorcery and black magic, and they don't want to go near it. Ayahuasca is used in the indigenous context in a very different way as it's used by my line, Santo Daime, and as it's used in the West. For example, I know someone who was doing some research with the Shipibo people, and sometimes she would go to a tribe and say, well, where's your page, where's your shaman? And they would say, well, we don't have a shaman here, we all get on. What would we need a shaman for? So it's a very liminal realm, and it's not as if people from the tribes are running to drink ayahuasca. In fact, it's not really something you particularly want to do as a normal tribesperson. The spirits exist as far as the people there are concerned. They're a given, and that whole spiritual world is a given, and perhaps not something you want to get really too close to because it's considered dangerous. And the shaman himself or herself is viewed with a degree of suspicion and fear because they have a foot in each of those worlds. Of course, there are all sorts of different shamans working in all sorts of different ways, but often they would live in a hut separated from the rest of the community. Often they would become a shaman because of some horrific illness that they've gone through or some kind of a cathartic experience. They're kind of people on the edge of society, and tribe people would go there if they had a problem to solve. So yes, they were healers. If someone came along, you know, they had a disease, and the shaman himself or herself might drink and the client might not drink, and the shaman would come back from his visions with perhaps a plant that they should use, or perhaps some advice, or maybe he'd ask them to drink ayahuasca. He may heal the disease by saying, you have this because Don Germano sent a invisible magic dart at you, and now you have to go and resolve things with Don Germano. And Don Germano might end up being lynched. Ayahuasca has been a weapon of war, in a sense that if you knew that your enemy was going to attack you, then you could be ready and you could attack him first. It's used to find lost objects, it's used for all number of things. And what I'm trying to get at here is that the Indian world is very different to where we are, and not something that we can understand very easily. In fact, when some of the early anthropologists went to go and study the Indian tribes, they asked them, why do you go to war with your neighbours? And the answer came back, we go to war over women. And the anthropologists just couldn't believe this. They thought, what an absurd thing to say. And they looked for all kinds of different reasons why they were going to fight. And yeah, it kind of turns out that a lot of their disputes were just that. It was people going after women. And that's not to demean their culture in any way. I mean, in Europe, we go to war over different ways of structuring the economy. And our wars are many millions of times more destructive than theirs. I'm not at all trying to say that the Indian culture is any way inferior. I'm just trying to say it's very, very different. So, my line is Santo Daime, and that begins with Agudo
Yo,